Before the iPhone, before the Mac, before the man became a legend, there was a boy. A boy who grew up in a small California town, raised by adoptive parents, and destined to change the world. This is the story of Steve Jobs, a visionary, a rebel, a perfectionist, and the man behind Apple. Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco, California. But his life didn't start with a silver spoon. His biological parents, Joanne Schiebel and Abdulfatah Jandali, were young and unmarried. Joanne's strict father didn't approve of the relationship, especially with Jandali being a Syrian immigrant. So they made a difficult choice, to give up their son for adoption. Paul and Clara Jobs, a modest couple from Mountain View, California, adopted the baby and gave him the name that would someday be known around the globe, Steve Jobs. Paul Jobs was a mechanic who loved working with his hands. He taught Steve how to take things apart and put them back together. Whether it was electronics, radios, or cars, young Steve was captivated by how things worked. He wasn't just a kid who liked gadgets, he was a kid who wanted to understand the soul of every machine. In school, Steve was a handful. He was bright, often too bright for his own good. He got bored easily, played pranks on teachers, and questioned everything. But one teacher, Imogen Hill, recognized his potential and helped him skip a grade. Later, Steve would credit her for igniting his love for learning. As a teenager, Steve dabbled in philosophy, poetry, and eventually, Eastern spirituality. He experimented with LSD and embraced the counterculture of the 1970s. Even back then, he believed in doing things differently, not just thinking outside the box, but questioning why the box existed in the first place. In high school, Steve met a fellow computer whiz, the shy, brilliant Steve Wozniak. The two bonded over their love of electronics and mischief. One of their first ventures, selling blue boxes, illegal devices that let people make free long-distance calls. Jobs later said, if it hadn't been for the blue boxes, there would have been no Apple. Where Wozniak saw technology, Jobs saw opportunity. After a short stint at Reed College, which he dropped out of, Jobs returned to California. He took a job at Atari and saved up money for a spiritual trip to India. When he returned, he was more focused than ever. In 1976, in that famous garage in Los Altos, Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne started Apple Computer. Their first product was the Apple I, a simple circuit board, but it was the Apple II that changed everything. Apple wasn't just making computers. They were making tools for the mind, and Jobs had a vision, a computer for the rest of us. Coming up in Part 2. Apple goes public, Jobs meets his match at Pixar, and the rise of a technology empire. Steve Jobs was just getting started. The world hadn't seen anything yet. The rise of Apple 1977 to 1984. From a garage in Los Altos to Silicon Valley's elite, Apple's rise was nothing short of electric. In 1977, the Apple II became a runaway success. With its sleek design, color graphics, and built-in keyboard, it was unlike anything else on the market. Sales soared. By 1980, Apple went public, making Steve Jobs a multimillionaire at just 25 years old. But Jobs wasn't just after money, he wanted to change the world. While others saw computers as machines, Steve saw them as extensions of the human spirit, tools to unleash creativity and expression. In the early 80s, Jobs set his sights on a new project. A small team inside Apple, inspired by research from Xerox PARC, was working on a computer that used a graphical interface. Instead of typing commands, users could point and click. It was revolutionary. That project became the Macintosh, and Jobs took over its development with his signature intensity. Jobs demanded perfection. He clashed with teammates, drove people to exhaustion, but also inspired brilliance. The Macintosh team called themselves pirates, and they lived by Jobs' mantra, "It's better to be a pirate than join the Navy." Finally, in 1984, Jobs unveiled the Macintosh with a commercial directed by Ridley Scott, aired during the Super Bowl, declaring, "You'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984." The launch was iconic. The product, beautiful, but behind the scenes, trouble was brewing. Segment 4. The fall 1985. Despite the flashy debut, Macintosh sales began to slump. The computer was expensive and underpowered compared to IBM PCs. Meanwhile, Jobs' management style was becoming more erratic. John Sculley, the CEO Jobs had recruited from Pepsi, began to lose faith in him. The board backed Scully. In a dramatic power struggle, Jobs was stripped of his duties and effectively forced out of Apple. At just 30 years old, the man who co-founded Apple was fired from his own company. It was a crushing blow, but it wouldn't be the end. Jobs later said, "Getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me." The wilderness years 1985 to 1996 out of Apple, but not out of ideas, Jobs started a new company. Next, he aimed to build a powerful, elegant computer for higher education and business. The next computer was a masterpiece of design, but it was expensive and never gained much market traction. Yet, the software it ran would someday become the foundation of macOS. At the same time, Jobs bought a small animation studio from George Lucas and renamed it Pixar. Pixar wasn't a tech company. It was a creative gamble, but Jobs saw something others didn't: the power of storytelling through technology. In 1995, Pixar released Toy Story, the world's first fully computer-animated feature film. It was a blockbuster. Pixar became a household name, and Steve Jobs suddenly found himself back on top. Jobs wasn't just a tech visionary, he had become a media mogul. Part 3. The Triumphant Return, and how Steve Jobs reinvented Apple, technology, and design forever. Sometimes, the comeback is greater than the setback, and for Steve Jobs, Act 2 was just beginning. Let me know when you're ready for Part 3, Steve Jobs' Return to Apple and Reinvention, which will cover Jobs' comeback, the iMac, iPod, and how he reshaped the digital world. After more than a decade in the wilderness, Steve Jobs returned to the company he co-founded, not as an employee, but as a savior. By the mid-1990s, Apple was on the brink of collapse. Products were confusing, the brand was fading, and Microsoft had taken the lead. In 1997, Apple made a bold move. It bought Jobs' struggling company Next, not for the hardware, but for the software. That software would eventually become the foundation for Apple's modern operating systems. More importantly, it brought Steve Jobs back. He returned as an advisor, but it wasn't long before he was calling the shots again. He cleaned house, slashing products, restructuring teams, and setting a new course. One of his first acts, cutting Apple's product line from over a dozen to just 4. Jobs also secured a surprising lifeline, a $150 million investment from Microsoft. At the 1997 Macworld Expo, he shocked the audience by announcing the partnership with Bill Gates via satellite. We have to let go of this notion that for Apple to win, Microsoft has to lose. Reinventing the brand 1998 to 2001. In 1998, Apple unveiled a product that signaled the start of something new, the iMac. Designed by a rising star at Apple, Jony Ive, it came in translucent colors and looked like no other computer in the world. It wasn't just a machine, it was a statement. Technology could be fun, beautiful, and personal. The iMac was a hit. Jobs was back in control, and Apple was back in the game. Behind the scenes, he was building something bigger. In 2001, Apple opened its first retail stores, a risky move that critics called foolish. But Jobs had a vision: to control the customer experience from start to finish. That same year, Apple introduced another groundbreaking product, a small white device that would change how the world listened to music, the iPod. 1,000 songs, in your pocket, simple words, huge impact. The iPod wasn't the first MP3 player, but it was the first one people actually wanted to use. Seamless, sleek, intuitive. Apple's momentum was building. The Digital Hub and the iPhone Revolution 2003 to 2007. Steve Jobs didn't want Apple to be just a computer company anymore. He envisioned it as the center of a digital lifestyle. That meant music, photos, video, communication, all in one ecosystem. In 2003, he launched the iTunes Store, a legal, easy way to buy music online. The music industry resisted at first, but eventually joined. Jobs wasn't just changing products, he was rewriting industries. Meanwhile, something even bigger was coming. Jobs had his eye on the ultimate all-in-one device, something that combined a phone, an iPod, and an internet communicator. In January 2007, he stepped onto the stage at Macworld, dressed in his trademark black turtleneck and jeans, and said, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." The iPhone launched that summer, and the world has never been the same. Multi-touch screens. No physical keyboard. A phone that felt more like a pocket-sized computer. It was magic. It was madness. It was Steve. Part 4. The rise of the iPad, the battle with Android, and the final years of Steve Jobs, a visionary at the edge of time. The iPhone launched a revolution, but Steve Jobs wasn't finished yet. His final act would be his most personal. The final act 2008 to 2010. With the iPhone, Apple changed the world. But Steve Jobs wasn't done yet. He had one more big idea, one that would blur the line between laptop and smartphone. In 2010, Steve unveiled the iPad, a sleek, glass and aluminum tablet that many doubted would succeed. Critics called it just a big iPhone. But Jobs, as always, saw the future. Studio microphone Steve Jobs said, "iPad is our most advanced technology in a magical and revolutionary device at an unbelievable price." The iPad exploded in popularity, used by students, creatives, professionals, and everyday users. It redefined portable computing and opened an entirely new category of devices. By now, Apple wasn't just a tech company, it was a cultural force, and Steve Jobs, he was its soul. The private battle 2003 to 2011. But even as Apple rose to unimaginable heights, Steve was quietly fighting a battle of his own, against a rare form of pancreatic cancer. He was first diagnosed in 2003, but kept it secret for nearly a year while trying alternative treatments. Eventually, he underwent surgery, and for a while, it seemed he was recovering. Steve appearing thin but energetic at keynotes in public, he remained the passionate showman, unveiling the iPhone 4, FaceTime, and the App Store ecosystem. But behind the scenes, his health was deteriorating. Steve Jobs always controlled the narrative. Even when he was dying, he still focused on the work, on beauty, on legacy. In 2009, he took a 6-month leave for a liver transplant. When he returned, he was visibly weaker, but still delivering keynotes with fire in his eyes. The farewell 2011. By 2011, Jobs knew his time was limited. In August, he stepped down as CEO of Apple, writing in a short but emotional letter, "I have always said if there ever came a day when I could no longer meet my duties and expectations as Apple's CEO, I would be the first to let you know. Unfortunately, that day has come." He handed the reins to Tim Cook, his trusted operations chief, and remained as chairman of the board. Just 2 months later, on October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. The world mourned. Not just a businessman, not just a tech visionary, but a storyteller, a builder, a dreamer. Legacy Jobs' death sparked an outpouring of grief, from Silicon Valley to Shanghai. Presidents, CEOs, artists, and everyday users paid tribute. His legacy, not just the iPhone, not just Apple, but the idea that technology should serve the individual, not the other way around. He didn't invent the personal computer, the smartphone, or the tablet, but he made them iconic, human, desirable. He left behind a company with a powerful identity, and a culture of focus, elegance, and thinking differently. Steve once said, "We're here to put a dent in the universe," and he did. Stay hungry. Stay foolish. Steve Jobs. Thank you, Steve, for reminding us that passion matters, that design matters, that vision, paired with relentless execution, can move mountains. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let us know in the comments, what's your favorite Steve Jobs moment?